So Tim Pool had, God, what's his name? Actual Justice Warrior. I forget his actual name. He had him on the show and they were talking about a bunch of things. And at some point they got into the topic of divorce because they were talking about Steven Crowder and his wife, Hillary, how they were going through a divorce because they're not happy with each other. Did we cover the video at the time? But there was a video that leaked out of them like clearly just not getting along. Steven seemed to be berating her. Of course, we only saw one snippet, but that one snippet didn't look good. Hillary made it very clear that she's not happy. Steven seemed less excited about the divorce, but I mean, the process is happening anyway, and it's all happening in the public sphere. It feels like Steven Crowder has just been having scandal after scandal. He's going through the scandal with Not Gay Jared. That was his name. Don't judge me about it, okay? He's going with the scandal with his wife. Then there was a scandal with the Daily Wire because of the contract negotiations and all that stuff that hit the fan. Oh my goodness. It just feels like Steven Crowder has really, he really just keeps stepping on he's stepping on every rake, or if he's not stepping on every rake, he is stepping on every bear trap, which I would say is worse. It's not looking good. Like even if all of these scandals are not ending in the worst possible way for Steven, he doesn't look the worst. Scandal after scandal after scandal. If people just associate your name with scandal, that's not a positive trait to have. It's not. And I was looking at Steven Crowder's like more recent viewership. It is down. Now, of course, maybe it comes close to the election. Now the election is getting kind of closer, so I don't know. Maybe when it gets closer to the election, it'll go back up. But point is, Steven is not in the best point of his career or probably life right now. And so they started talking about this, and it pivoted to the idea of if his wife should have been allowed to divorce him at all before Tim Pool comes out, and he gives the take that he's against divorce. He believes that divorce should not be allowed outside of scenarios where the husband is brutalizing the woman, like beating her half to death. And I think adultery. Those were the two exceptions he listed. It was adultery and beating your wife. Outside of that, it's a sacrament before God. It's an agreement and a contract before the Lord. It should be treated seriously. And today, society doesn't treat it too seriously. Anyway, I'll let him speak for himself. But what really interests me about this, before we get started, is actual Justice Warrior's reaction, because he's just not vibing with this at all. He just can't get down with what Tim Pool's dealing here. Let's check it out.
She initiated the divorce and legal documents.
I think she's entitled to nothing during these proceedings. And I think the problem is no-fault divorce. And I think we're not dealing with a...
So they're talking about the fact that Hillary is of course going to be pursuing some amount of money in the separation. She is going to be pursuing that to raise the kids, etc., stuff like that. And Tim doesn't believe she should get any money. Now, I think when it comes to these situations, people get married, get divorced, one's really rich. I think it's more complicated than, okay, she just gets like 20, 30, 40% of this man's wealth. I think it can be more complicated than that. But if a wife is divorcing with a wealthy man or a man who's done well for himself during their marriage, there's a question of how much did that woman contribute to that success? And someone could say like, oh, how much did Hillary, she wasn't on the show. Okay, but Hillary probably took care of Crowder's kids when he wasn't there. Hillary probably kept the house in order. Hillary did a lot of other things to support him. I'm not saying that she should get 50. I think that'd be unfair. But the idea that like Hillary was like a non-participant in Steven's success or did not support Steven in any way or their family, I don't think that's true. Not to mention the fact that if they're going through a divorce, depending on where the kids go, it is going to be necessary for her to have enough money in order to take care of the children as well. Point is, I think that I don't think that you should, of course, like split it down the middle, give one person half, but I do think there is good reasons that during divorces, there is a conversation about how much money should this person get in the separation in order for them to be able to sustain themselves as we enter some instability here. We hear all the time from conservatives that marriage is a tool of stability, that if you track people who are successful, if they are married, they're much more likely to be economically stable. They're much more likely to have a financially, I guess you could say solvent at the very least, household. But if that's the case, then it would also make sense that during a divorce, when people are splitting and you no longer have two incomes and now you have one income, that type of instability, that change could be a real negative factor for the people trying to go through a divorce, a real negative factor that does need to be supplemented in some way. Anyway, continuing.
Traditional at-fault divorce, we're dealing with irreconcilable differences. And I think the real answer should have been that when problems arose, a judge told them both, STFU, you are in a marriage, it is a sacred covenant, you will not do X, Y, and Z. The problem I have with this is marriage has become dating. It's dating with like strings attached in the financial world after the fact. No. Don't get married if you don't want to get married, okay? If you don't want to get into a position where you have to file for a divorce and hire lawyers for these reasons, then don't get married.
Right.
Look, I agree with the idea that you should not treat marriage lightly. You know, at least culturally, I was raised that way. I understand the sentiment. I get it. But the idea that there's these two people that are unhappy, Hillary and Stephen, who entering the relationship maybe thought the situation was completely different. Maybe Hillary thought Stephen was a different guy. Maybe Stephen thought Hillary was a different gal. And it just didn't mesh, and obviously didn't mesh. We have video proof of it not meshing, and the fact that they don't have a fantastic relationship, right? So if that's the case, is the solution that these two people just stay in an unhappy marriage? And if they do stay in an unhappy marriage together, are we doing this just for the health of the child? Because if that's the case, why wouldn't they be able to raise them together but separated in a way? Because if they're together, and I understand the idea, you have one household, more stability, easier for the kid. If you have two people yelling at each other in a household in the way that I was watching them go at it, or really mostly Crowder go at it on that footage we got that was released, that is not an environment you want to raise a kid in. It is not a good environment or a good example to set for a child that this is how you treat your wife. You berate her like this while she's pregnant and have her go do all these chores. And I'm not trying to, I don't want to judge their situation too much. I really don't want to. But I mean, it's just so off base.
At all. And so
and not to mention, sacred covenant, is Tim Pool like a really hardcore Christian? We're gonna tell them, I'm sorry, it's sacred. God says you have to stay together no matter how much you don't like each other. Why? Why not just give people the freedom to choose? That seems to generally be Tim Pool's vibe about everything. He's like a pro-freedom guy. At least that's part of his shtick. He likes freedom. He likes the government not sticking their nose where it doesn't belong. I can understand the position of the government has no place in marriage. That I can understand more, but I can't understand the position of I'm pro-freedom and the government has a place in marriage, and that place in marriage is restricting people to stop them from leaving it if they're unhappy and keeping them stuck in an unhappy marriage. Here's another question. Let's say they raise the kid to 18 and then want to get divorced. They're like, we were just doing this until 18. Now we want to get divorced. We no longer want to be together. If it's still a sacred covenant before God, then we have a situation where Stephen and Hillary could be in their 60s, hating each other, completely unhappy. They might not even be living together anymore. And they're just married because that's just how it is. That's because it's sacred. Things that are sacred to the people who believe in them and hold them to be sacred. So for people who view marriage as a religious item or as a religious contract, and it's a contract before God, then yes, it would be sacred. And it might, at least religiously sacred. It still has maybe a different type of sacredness, like a different type of, I don't know how to describe it, but it has a certain weight to it, of course, marriage versus dating. But as an individual who is in an unhappy marriage, if the purpose of the marriage was for two people to share love and be happy to each other, if it no longer serves the purpose, what is the purpose of a marriage? What would be the purpose of keeping two, say, 66-year-old elderly people who have already raised their kids together? What would be the motivation here to keep these people together if the purpose of the marriage was to facilitate love which no longer exists? I can't sail a boat in a dry lake. right? The boat's pointless now. For me to continue to maintain it and live in it, it would be stupid if it no longer serves the purpose.
The issue is not so much like in this argument I'm making, it's not to do with Hillary or Stephen specifically. It's about the fact that we live in this world where people get married and then go, you know what? It was a mistake. Let's sever ties. You pay me. No, okay, hold on. This whole thing is broken. The whole thing is broken. The other point, you know, so like Lauren Southern responded to me saying,
again, we can look at divorce rates. We can have a conversation about why divorce rates are so high or why that's upsetting. But at the end of the day, is the solution just to, you know what this reminds me of? What's the solution to the currency, the ruble collapsing? Oh, just make it so people can't trade the ruble. That didn't fix the problem. You just covered the problem up. It's still going to be worse and worse down the line. Oh, you two hate each other and want to get divorced and you're at each other's necks? Well, just don't get divorced. You're not allowed. See, problem solved. Divorce rates have gone down. Well, okay, but I think maybe domestic abuse rates or other issues within relationships, violence, etc., verbal abuse, I think there's a good chance it would go up if you're stuck with people that you don't like. At a certain point, if like the contract's still there, but two people aren't even living together anymore, at a certain point, what's the purpose of the contract? What would be the purpose of the contract at that point? Is it just for tradition? Is it just because we don't like the fact that marriage rates, there's like such high divorce rates? What would be the purpose that's being served at that point?
Or she responded in general to many people. So what? Hillary gives up her job for Stephen, but now that they're getting a divorce, she has no money. And I'm like, even if she kept her job, she would never have anywhere near as much money as Steven Crowder has. Like, so I don't appreciate this argument that Crowder, as a wealthy man, pays her $25K a month. If Steven Crowder was worth nothing and had no job, we wouldn't be having this argument. So it's not an issue of whether she's entitled to as a woman.
Look, I'm not going to put a number to it because I don't know all the financial background. I don't think Tim knows all the financial background either, to be blunt. So I can't say if $25K a month is a number. I'd like to make $25K enough. I'd love $25K a month. But the idea that she gave up her job to serve the household as a housewife, and that's what Stephen wanted. That's what Stephen wanted as a conservative man. And now a divorce is happening, separation's coming. I mean, she has to have something to sustain herself. It doesn't necessarily have to be 25 a month. Maybe it'll be 10 a month. Maybe it'll be 15 a month. Maybe it'll be 8, 7. Who knows what it'll be? But she needs something to sustain herself for at least a time period, for at least a certain set number of months or years until she can, you know, get her on her own 2 feet with her own employment, get her own household, manage her own finances, etc. At the very least, even if you wanted to reformat how divorces work and how financial compensation of divorces work, the solution can't just be, screw it. Because at a certain point, what you're going to have is a bunch of people stuck in unhappy marriages because at this point, they're just too committed financially to be able to pull out.
And give up her job. It's an issue of Stephen has money, therefore they think he should pay. So there's an interesting phenomenon here that for some reason has emerged in this particular case, where you're seeing a lot of these traditional conservatives actually come out as full-on feminist as soon as it comes to the issue of divorce.
I don't think it's feminist at all. If you want,
but it literally
if you want to incentivize traditional marriage, like you can't like put one party in a position where they get totally like ripped off in case of a divorce.
You're correct, and the response is to not allow divorce.
The feminist response is to say that all these women need to like store away money in case of a divorce.
No, it isn't.
Like in order to pay for it. Like
I don't even know what actual Justice Warrior is saying about that's the feminist response. I've never heard that from a feminist before. Maybe I just haven't heard the conversation. Maybe that's in his interpretation of what he believes a feminist would believe. I just haven't heard that before.
The traditional response to how you fix marriage is divorce is not allowed.
Okay, but
there's rare circumstances where like a guy is threatening to murder and beating his wife and his kids, and infidelity is one of these things. These are people who I don't think those accusations are on the table. They're mostly just angry with each other and yelling at each other, and they're not getting along. That's where a judge comes in and says, you are grown adults. You will behave appropriately. You have children. Those children need functioning parents. You will treat this relationship properly, get therapy. And at the very least, if you don't like being around each other, you will be professional. And you chose this covenant. We now as a society, this is why it is.
Okay, so what would this could this not just produce like higher rates of unwed childbirth? Wouldn't this, like, people would just be like, well, I'm not going to get married because if we get married, even if we find out one day we might not like each other in the future or circumstances change, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, well, we'd never be able to leave it. And so wouldn't this just, I mean, it feels like a rule that would just crush marriage as an institution. Definitely when people, and Americans especially, love options, love choices, love to see forks in the road that they can take down, even if they're not going to take that fork in the road, just in case.
Absolutely a feminist position to say we should allow for divorce over irreconcilable differences.
But like,
by the way, can I just throw out there, I like that feminist here is like a dirty word. Like, no, that beliefs no. This believes feminist. This believes actually okay. No, this believes feminist. A dirty word.
what are you advocating for them to like live in the same house when they don't like each other? Like,
yes,
that's crazy.
I think
crazy.
then don't get.
She can't even, dude. If he can't get actual justice warrior on board, man, he's lost the plot. He's lost the plot.
I think that then don't get married. Don't get married. This is what I'm saying. You don't have to get married. Nobody made them do it. They said, let's get married. And then, and then 10 years later, they're like, I'm not having fun. I quit.
So in your like theory of like how this should work, like, so you should be able to theoretically, using an example very like not related to this at all. Like, you know, let's say you're a media personality and you move out, buy a townhouse, and then you cut your wife off financially. Like, you should be able to do that. There should be no court redress for that. Because that's what happened in this case. So no, as long as you don't get divorced, though.
No, the judge will say, stop, you are married, STFU, you will both be in this house, you will raise your kids, you will stop fighting, and you will get therapy. If you don't want to get married, don't.
Man, so you're going to make them stay in the same house, too. Ah, man, I can already see the graph. The line go up on the domestic violence rates. Dude, this is such a terrible idea.
Get married.
You just said that you don't trust judges in the way that they handle people with money versus no money, and now you're like, the
totally
judge
separate
needs
argument.
to assess whether or not you should live in the same house?
That's completely irrelevant to the point that I'm making. Okay, so let's talk about
the idea of giving a judge this much power over somebody's marriage is scary to me. I don't believe some man in a powdered wig should be able to decide whether or not I stay with my significant other.
If you don't want to get married, you don't get married. Instead, the progressive, feminist, and liberal response has been, let's weaken the institution of marriage. And I'm like, whoa, leave marriage as it is. People just don't have to get married. People need to understand. And part of me, I'm kind of glad we're seeing all this.
Here's the question, though: if you marry this person, you can never ever leave unless they beat you. Unless they're beating you, just can't leave, no matter how loveless and dry and barren, like the Nevada desert, that life becomes with them. You must stay together. It's going to scare people away from marriage. And this institution that you wanted to protect, I mean, it's going to lose a ton of people who might have otherwise got married and may have stayed together forever, but just wanted to make sure that they had the option, given how relationships can go and ebbs and flow. I mean, in my city, if I knew that marrying somebody, there was no, you cannot divorce, I would like to marry somebody. But if I know that if I marry somebody, that I can never leave unless they end up beating me or I end up beating them, I just won't get married. And it sucks because I want to participate in marriage. I don't plan to get divorced. I don't want to get divorced. I would imagine whoever I would marry, I would love. But the idea that, like, I love them now, is that going to be true in 25 years, depending on how they change and grow as a person or how I change and grow in a person? Let's say that the person I love out of nowhere just starts smoking crystal meth. Is it going to, like, where are the exceptions going to be? Well, we just got to get through it together. Like, you have to give people an escape hatch for disaster marriages.
Because when you see the shocking reality of divorce, many people realize, like, uh-oh, there's a problem here. Maybe I shouldn't get married. Maybe you shouldn't. If you get married and you swear an oath till death do us part, I do not believe you should be allowed to get divorced unless except in extreme circumstances. Like traditionally what it used to be was infidelity, abuse, criminal activity, things like this. With the issue, with the Crowders, yes, I very much believe a family court judge should say, the problem here is two people who don't get along. Be adults, grow up, shut your mouths, do not fight in front of the kids. That's it.
Okay, so because, I mean, like that's like an ideal like perception of what should be, but like let's say that meets your parameters for something that you can get divorced over, okay? But you have a traditional
like abuse and stuff.
Yeah. Well, like not this case, but like let's say a theoretical
beating
case.
his wife.
Yeah, something like that. So in that particular case, like let's say one of the people is same situation, makes all the income, the other person gave up their job 10 years ago. Like, should they be able to run up the costs and like when the other person can't afford an attorney, be frozen out of the estate, even though that estate in Texas law is a joint estate?
It's not a singular scenario. In the instance of, say, abuse, a woman shows up to the police covered in blood with teeth missing, and then they go, okay, we're arresting the guy. Now the guy's not working.
Women
But I'm saying if you
it's not always that simple. Abuse is never, I mean, abuse can be like that, but a lot of times abuse isn't like that. It's not that evident. People who abuse tend to know that, you know, it's not widely smiled upon to beat your wife. And so, I mean, there are abusers who would be like, I'm going to hit them specifically in these areas so, you know, they get covered up. I'm going to, like, people, or I'm going to try to explain it away. Point is, like, if that's the standard of evidence we need, like, the only time you can get divorced is if you walk into a police station and you're beaten half to death, then you're going to keep a lot of people in a lot of unhappy marriages. And we're going to see that happiness rating, you know, that happiness rating, I think, what is it, Iceland or Finland always wins. We're going to go down a few points. Hell, we might go down a few dozen points.
Eventually file for divorce.
And what is the purpose of this? The sacredness of the institution? I mean, if we keep this institution rigid and as it doesn't change with the times and ever evolving societies and people needing to, you know, have this institution molded to their lives, then it's gonna become redundant for the vast majority of people. And I'd rather not see marriage become redundant. I quite like marriage. I quite like the idea of marriage.
In that kind of situation, like how should the attorneys be paid for?
In a situation of like a woman is being mercilessly beaten.
Yeah, like an abuse situation that meets your criteria for divorce, right?
I think in perhaps then yes, the estate itself would be used to fund the proceedings for both sides, like Texas law says.
If you have, you know, one person who can't pay or whatever, or like, you know, I'm talking about during the proceedings.
The family is a dual income, like they file jointly, they're married or whatever. Then it should be that the divorce lawyers are paid. Now, I think the issue there is you don't really have the same kind of divorce law when you have evidence of clear violations of fault in a divorce. Now, that being said, infidelity is where things do get particularly troubling. And I know a lot of people then say, Tim, the problem here is women will fabricate or men will fabricate. They'll accuse each other of infidelity. And I'm like, yeah, bad people do bad things. How about you don't get married?
Well, I think the reason you got so much pushback is because like the practical reality is that a lot of people on the right are pushing for a more traditional like stay at home like kind of marriage situation. Now I'm getting married, but my fiance is gonna make pretty good money. Like she's currently working on her career and all that. But like, you know, I would expect if I got her to stay at home, if like we were to get divorced, that I wouldn't be able to drown her in legal costs and like, you know, half your estates or whatever.
But what if you were poor?
Well, first of all, if you're poor,
if you were poor,
yeah, same thing. If I didn't have the money to cover it,
she should
and
have
like
to pay for
we're married, yeah, from our joint estate.
Wait, I thought this should be assumed, but this should not be a gender specific thing. And it is true. I've seen cases, and I felt like a schoolgirl watching it. I thought it was quite funny. I don't know why, but I've seen cases where like boyfriends with very, very rich girlfriends do get, husbands with very, very rich girlfriends actually do get severance. I don't know if the term severance, but they do get money. They do get a lot of divorce money. That has happened. Absolutely. It shouldn't be gender specific. Only women get the money. No, as a man, I don't agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. My problem is no fault divorce. It's not that Crowder has to pay. It's that it's no fault divorce. Like getting divorced for.
Man, I just see it like we have one life and you make a decision in your early 20s to get married because that's the way you were raised and you found somebody that you thought it was going to work. And 10, 15 years later, you've tried everything and it just doesn't work. You don't like each other. You don't like being in the same household. Hell, we don't even need to introduce kids into this area. You don't even need to have kids. He didn't say that it had to be kid specific. And you're just now stuck with this person at the age of like 32 after like 12 years of failed marriage forever. You're just going to go to the grave with this person unless what? You beat them? if anything, it feels like it would become a motivation to beat your wife to get out of a relationship. This is a terrible idea. I do not like this idea at all.
We're fighting a lot.
But I'm saying this is why you're getting pushback. It's like the misstatement of the 25K, which, to be fair, that was put out intentionally, I believe, by Louderwick Crowder to make it seem like it's greedy Hillary. That was their narrative. And then it's the idea that, like, yeah, the traditional housewife gets totally screwed under your scenario.
But why is
if
it
there
unfair?
is a divorce?
Why is it unfair to
Man, see, these types of opinions, this is the type of stuff I remember when people talked about overturning Roe v. Wade and then sending it back to the states. People were at least on the conservative side, were quick to say, this isn't going to get out of control. We're just going to allow the states to handle these situations. And they're going to go after abortion in some states, but trust me, it's not going to get out of control. And before you knew it, IFE was being targeted. Before you knew it, states were trying to just enforce full-on abortion bans. Things were getting out of control very, very quickly. And I feel as if Tim doesn't really, I feel like he doesn't understand the full implications of what he's asking for here, of how you're going to now have these people stuck in it forever, even if there's no purpose to continue the contract. Why keep a contract if it no longer serves a purpose? Why? If it no longer brings joy to either of the individuals, then the marriage is no longer a gain. It is a negative. It is a negative for them. And they're going to be trying to find loopholes to get out of their relationship. And I'd rather not have that scenario where people are trying to find ways to get out of their marriage by violating it, to trying to find some like fault because they're just so unhappy and they don't want to live with each other. Also, that's another question. Could people just be married and just not live with each other? That's what it used to be like. People would be married, and if they hate each other, just left, and they're still technically married, but they're not together really, and they're married only in name only. But if anything, I would say stuff like that's more disrespectful to the institution of marriage, because if the Sheila and the man, right, are going out there and they're sleeping around because they're no longer together while still being married, what's more insulting to the sacred tradition that Tim Pool respects so much? Man. Also, Tim Pool's not married, and so maybe if he went through a marriage, maybe it would, you know what? I don't want to speculate too much on Tim Pool's relationship status, but I will say this, that I feel like one bad marriage could change Tim Pool's opinion very, very quickly.